Have a quorum today, but we're still within the bylaws for having the meeting. We don't have anything to vote on today anyway, so that's the only thing that prevents us from doing is voting on, but we don't have that on the agenda. So we have a good agenda. I think it'll be some interesting discussion. One thing I wanted to do just as a start, it's kind of best practice for our company, and I realized the last time we were here I wasn't totally sure what the process was, and I noticed coming in there's some construction going on, but we try to start off all of our meetings with a safety message. And I thought, because we have some new folks here, in terms of exiting the building, if there is a emergency or fire alarm or anything that goes off, we can exit directly out to our left here and follow the signs, but I don't want us to go downstairs towards the construction because it can get, I think, a little congested out here. So if we can exit out towards Main Street here, I think that will be a lot better. We don't have someone from VCU in the meeting today to kind of lead us out, but I think as we've all come in the front entrance before, we'll take a left here and go straight out. But with that, if there's anybody else has any introductions or remarks, I think we all know each other now at this point. So we will move on to Mike's update on the legislative session. And I volunteered, Mike, if you want, I can advance your slides if you want me to. But
sure, I'll give you
do that. So
give you the high sign,
okay,
and we'll truck on through this. Good morning, everyone. I am Michael Skiffington. I'm Director of Policy and Planning for the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. I'm going to talk to you guys for a few minutes this morning about the recently concluded General Assembly session. We'll keep this very light and brief and informal, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to stop me at any point, and I'll be happy to talk or address whatever questions you might have. So some background information on the session. 2017 was an election year for the House of Delegates, and it was a pretty big blue wave. The 100-seat House went from 66-34 Republican to 51-49 Republican. So the Democrats picked up 15 seats, and there were some seats that from retiring Republicans that Republicans managed to hold on to. So all in all, you had 19 new delegates, nearly a fifth of the body were brand spanking new freshmen, which, as you might imagine, provided for a pretty interesting and different dynamic. Over the 60-day session, they plowed through nearly 4,000 bills and resolutions, and about half of them made it through the gauntlet. When you talk about energy, I'll go ahead and just roll through these. There were dozens of bills related to energy that were introduced, which is usually the case. Most did not pass, which is also usually the case. Two different reasons for that this year. Number one, a lot of them were introduced by those 19 new folks that I talked about, and they were either cashing in on campaign promises to introduce legislation, or very passionate about a particular cause, and they have to come to the realization that freshmen don't always get their way in the General Assembly. So a lot of things were squashed just on that general principle. One notable casualty that I'll talk about is an energy storage study that was introduced by Delegate Toscano from Charlottesville that would have required DMME and its Solar Energy Development and Energy Storage Authority to do a very comprehensive 2-year soup-to-nuts study of the emerging energy storage industry. As a matter of policy, it was passed out of both the House and Senate, but it was originally a casualty of the General Assembly's initial inability to come to a budget agreement. But it was resurrected in the final agreement from a week or two ago that the House and Senate came to once they decided on how they wanted to expand Medicaid. The other dominoes just kind of fell into place. And a very small domino is that energy storage study. A watered-down version of it is in the budget, and money, more importantly, is in the budget for DME and the Solar Authority to do that study.
Mike, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
About that, was that an idea that came? Where was the origin of that idea? Did the storage or solar and storage agency, or sorry, our equivalent on the solar side, did they come up with that idea, or was it brought by the member? How did that
It
come
was
about?
it was brought by Delegate Toscano from Charlottesville with no, he just dropped it in, didn't reach out to us, and basically he got the idea from Maryland, who recently went through a similar study. There was also a corresponding tax credit that he introduced that didn't make it through, but basically he was borrowing, shall we say, from our neighbors to the north. And a second reason why most of the bills related to energy did not pass was that the gigantic bill from Dominion, the Grid Transformation and Security Act, sort of sucked all the oxygen out of the energy debate. And a lot of the bills that were introduced, a great deal of them were folded into this ginormous thing that I'm going to be spending the rest of my few minutes here talking about. So amongst the many things Senate Bill 966 does, it provides for bill credits for customers of Dominion and Appalachian Power, which is the investor-owned utility that serves most of the western part of the Commonwealth. $200 from Dominion, $1 million credits to Dominion customers over the next 2 years. APCO agreed to forego $10 million in fuel recovery costs, which they will not pursue. We can go ahead and go to the next one, please, Tom. And there's also savings involved from the recently passed federal tax reform legislation, $125 million to Dominion customers and $50 to APCOs. The Dominion's Energy Share program, which is weatherization and assistance to low-income customers, that saw an extension and also some increased funding, $130 million over the next decade. A few years ago, Senate Bill 1349 was passed in 2015 as the General Assembly's response to the Clean Power Plan, and that legislation enacted a rate freeze wherein the State Corporation Commission was not going to be looking at the base rates of the investor-owned utilities for a set period of time to allow for the uncertainty that was the utilities said was around the Clean Power Plan, to give them time to respond to it. With the Trump administration sort of scrapping the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan, there was no more need for a rate freeze. So one of the things this bill did was eliminate that rate freeze, and moving from a system of reviewing those rates every 2 years to now a system where they will be done every 3 years, triennial reviews. And Appalachians comes first in 2020, and then on the next slide you'll see that Dominion's first one is in 2021. And you'll see that those reviews will allow the State Corporation Commission to determine if the utilities have set their rates too high and thus have over-earned, with a caveat that I'll get to in just a second. One thing they do also do that is different, and under previous law, the utilities had to over-earn for 2 consecutive rate review periods before a rate cut can be ordered. That requirement is gone, so if they over-earn in the 1 3-year period that the triennial review is based on, theoretically, some of that money could go back to the ratepayers, again, subject to the caveat I'm going to talk about. Costs, capital costs involved in setting those things up can be used to offset whatever excess earnings the SEC may find. And the definition of the grid transformation projects in the legislation is literally a paragraph long and covers an awful lot of ground, from LED lights, electric vehicle charging stations, storage systems, things involved with cybersecurity and grid reliability. There are a number of things that utilities can invest in to avail themselves of the offset of excess earnings. But they do still have to be approved by the SEC. So at the end of the day, during the triennial rate review process, if the utilities if the commission decides the utility is over-earned by $500 million, but the utility demonstrates $600 million of grid transformation projects that have been approved by the SEC, none of that goes back, none of the $500 million goes back to the ratepayer. So that is one of the biggest.
CC, is that during the 3-year period they can be approving those projects, or
I think
how do they?
That's a separate process from the triennial rate review. I mean, they can submit projects for approval to the SEC at any point, just like they do when they want to approve.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that's. Oh. Okay, a couple more on the renewable energy aspects of the bill. There's a big increase in the amount of solar, a tenfold increase from 500 to 5,000 megawatts, including wind as well, that will be declared in the public interest. There's an energy storage pilot program involved for each of the investor-owned utilities. This is dealing with battery storage. It's a 30 megawatt pilot for Dominion and a 10 megawatt pilot for APCO. And the bill also supports development of a pumped hydro storage facility in Southwest Virginia. There's been a recent drive towards trying to find projects down there to take advantage of perhaps some old mine works that might serve as a reservoir. There are a couple of spots or sites that Dominion is looking at to possibly put a facility down in Southwest Virginia. Offshore wind, the pilot program that is putting a couple of turbines out in the Atlantic Ocean that has been declared to be in the public interest. There was also some measures for energy efficiency to hopefully improve or streamline the approval by eliminating the reliance on one of the 4 tests that the SEC applies when they evaluate a potential utility-based program for energy efficiency. He also calls for over $1 billion of programs subject to approval to be filed, and there are stakeholder programs that each utility has to administer to help develop those programs, and DME is going to be a part of that, along with the SEC and other groups that are listed out in the legislation. So energy efficiency was also a big emphasis in this piece of legislation. And that is a very small nutshell of a very large piece of legislation, and if you have any other questions, I'm certainly happy to do my best to answer.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, real quick.
Oh, yeah.
So it looks like then the energy storage study is certainly connected, I mean, maybe not directly connected to that, but is complementary to that. Is that why it was? Is that part of the reason it was put back in?
I think, well, the pilot program in the...
Because you got a pilot program in this bill.
That's only for batteries, and it's just...
That's all it is.
That's all it's batteries, but the storage is, it's going to be a much more big picture view.
Okay.
Now, you said Maryland, I think, did you mean Massachusetts? Because there was a Massachusetts storage report 2014.
Yeah, Massachusetts is taking steps, but the legislation itself
References Maryland.
well, it was almost a cut and paste job.
So has there been a product out of that Maryland study?
They've released some initial findings. They also were able to pass their tax credit, and there have been a few people take advantage of that, but I think it's a little too early in the process to point to a final product there. But we're keeping our eyes on it, obviously.
You can download the Massachusetts report. You can download it for free. Decent read.
That's a 2-year study by DME.
Yes.
That may not be able to today. This organization was involved in the 2014 energy plan, probably your first big goal after being formed in 13, and then the 2016 update. I know there were 4. So as you look at how you want to provide input, both in person and then probably in writing would be helpful as well. There were 4 goals that were outlined, or 4 recommendations I think outlined in 2014. So take a look at those and see how Virginia has done in the last 4 years. But for the energy plan is due October 1st. We have 3.5 months. The governor is likely to do some sort of announcement, statement on the energy plan, the stakeholder process very soon. We're still trying to work out I guess how robust the stakeholder process will be as compared to 2014. We will be doing, with DME kind of leading 2 public meetings somewhere on the 95 corridor and somewhere on 81. As Mike did a great job explaining SB 966, so this energy plan will be the goals set forth in SB 966 will guide the energy plan, and so there is already a framework. You can I'm not sure if everybody has this great breakdown that Eric did a really good job of explaining 966. So it's pretty clear right now, kind of the goals in energy efficiency, renewable energy. We will be doing, as far as stakeholder meetings, there's a component in 966 for a stakeholder process run by the utilities. We'll be working closely with the governor's office, and so it won't be kind of done in a vacuum. That will be incorporated in our stakeholder process. We will be doing, one-on-one meetings as we are with VNEC, and I promise, April, we are trying to get this meeting that involves some folks from VEDP to talk about the cluster and other issues that you've brought up. And so we are open to do anyone who wants to have a meeting, we'll do a meeting. We want to make sure we use VNECA and our other two authorities, VCETA and VALDA, to provide input in the plan. And then of course on the public side, we'll have through our website, you can submit information. Anyone can submit information.
You know how the
reach out with
plan's going to
questions.
be different from like 2014?
Yeah, well, that's going to be.
So like the plan in 2014 was pretty.
It was a very, so this plan, I think the main difference you'll see in this plan, we're not going to be talking about history. You can go back to 2014's plan if you want to see history. We're going to be talking about the future and goals. So it, probably, because of that, the length will be different. It'll be, somewhere in between that thick report and this thin update from 2016, but it will be focused on goals, and goals specifically outlined in SB 966, and a much better way to kind of review where we're going and to kind of market Virginia's future energy. These are my other notes. So we haven't finalized the stakeholder process, so I really can't explain all that right now, and the governor will do that in a public way here soon. And of course, we need VNECA's input, whether it's some today if you want to talk, and then of course the next meeting, and then we want to have a letter outlining some priorities would be helpful.
Do you know what other authorities are doing or how they're approaching their contributions to the energy plan?
That hasn't really been presented to them yet, but it'll be in a similar fashion. We'll probably at least the other two authorities have opportunity at the meetings, and then ask for a statement from the board, from the chair, that they kind of come up collectively.
Sure.
It makes it a little bit easier for us, for staff, given our short fuse here, to kind of consider all of the input if it is kind of clearly written out in the letter.
So what I would recommend, I think there are two steps here. Eric, if you can keep the authority updated as we actually as the governor rolls out the stakeholder process, so we understand where are our opportunities for input. As April mentioned and Will alluded to, VNEC is working on setting up a meeting with kind of a joint group that's working on this, and with that there's presentation that lays out kind of priorities and areas of action. I've had the opportunity to kind of weigh in from the VNECA perspective with that process. What I think we should do, or what I would recommend for the group to consider, is once we have that meeting and we have kind of recommendations or potential actions that VNEC might be interested in putting forward, that we come back to VNECA with maybe a draft kind of letter that could be jointly signed by VNECA and VNEC that could go into that process, and at our next meeting we could have an opportunity to kind of review and consider that as a position of the authority. Since we don't have a quorum here today, we can't actually vote on any of that process. But and then in the meantime, what I would ask from the group is, if there are specific recommendations that your companies or organizations think would be useful to be kind of plugging into this process, send them to Eric, and he can kind of filter those and consolidate them, so we can make sure we're not missing anything. But think about that as we go forward. We'll get the process and kind of go from that. And others have suggestions on ways to proceed. But I think that would probably be the most efficient for you all, Will, is to, and I think a lot of things we've talked about here is how can, we foster innovation, the workforce. That stuff is, I've seen what VNEC has been putting forward, that's included in there, so.
And I apologize, I heard about the process. Did you mention the timeline?
We, we'll have to have a draft in September for that hard October 1 release, and so
A
all
lot
the
to do over
stakeholder
the
meetings
summer.
are going to be July and August are going to be.
A lot to do over the summer then, yeah, okay.
And one of the handouts, the other handout from the agenda is the recommendations from VNECA in 2012, 2013. Yeah.
424.
Yeah, in the emails that I sent everybody, there was also attachments there about nuclear background and all that stuff, which I don't think will be included in the next plan, but I think recommendations will be a big component of the next energy plan. So maybe you could use that as a framework, or if there's things on there that maybe can be updated, it's just something to think about, or just a launching off point.
So if you've got to have a draft by September, do we meet again?
I think we're going to discuss, I think we probably should, it's June now, I think we should try to meet probably in August.
I mean, it sounds like
I
we
know
should,
that's kind of a tough
we should
time
meet
for
with a
folks,
quorum
but,
if we're going to give you some formal recommendations.
and then we can also talk about, I think, remind me of the rules if we can circulate a letter. I don't know if we can't take a formal vote over the, through like email for folks to review or things that we have to do.
No, that would be, you can't circulate anything to
Okay.
other members, because that would be a
Yeah, so,
public meeting.
I think what we'll have to do.
I mean, you could send me something, and I can send that out to people.
Right, yeah. No, I wasn't thinking me. I was thinking. So yeah, I think we'll have to think about maybe an August meeting to try to do that, and we can clarify that when we get the kind of the stakeholder input timeline. But I think that's a good thing to shoot for. Is that right, Will?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Well, I guess my suggestion is that if we're gonna be looking at an August meeting, you ought to be trying to circulate that date soon,
Soon,
and
yeah.
not wait for some
Right.
further definition, because August is gonna be difficult for some people.
Sure. I think for the purposes of our professors at universities, probably early August may be a little bit better. As we can see, we don't have any
Yeah.
professors here today, so I don't know what their schedule's like.
That's probably true. And I know in my case, early August is better.
Maybe I could do a doodle.
Yeah, I
poll.
think we should do a poll, and I think let's make sure that the folks that weren't here today, they can understand that the next meeting, we intend to have actionable items, so we need to make sure we're gonna be able to have a quorum. Okay. Anything else on the energy plan? Okay. In the interest of time, I think, if you have, I do have actually some ideas on speakers that folks have suggested. Thank you again, Mr. Magwood, for coming. That was really, really helpful, and that's kind of the hope, is that we can make these substantive going forward in addition to our regular business. So if you have additional ideas, send them to Eric, and we can go from there. Are there any updates from VNECA members?
We're hoping with the IST to have an agreement with Liberty University here in about a month.
That's great.
So, yeah.
And,
we're excited.
in all likelihood, the most possible path forward is to operationalize that as a cyber.
Okay.
Because that way you don't have the cost of making steam, but the infrastructure is still there to do thermohydraulic testing if we need it. So we maintain that infrastructure, but we can operate it and make some use of it without spending that kind of money.
Has there been any discussion with DOE with their new cybersecurity office and focus on there, whether they'd be
Very
interested?
preliminary,
Yeah.
yeah. We're aware of it.
Anything else? I know Eric sent this out. Framatome is once again headquartered in North America, in Virginia. So, so that was great. Glad to be back, not that we ever really left. So with that, we'll open it up. Any additional public comments before we close?
Marshall Cohen has retired again. I think this time it's going to stick. So I am now the new executive director for VNEC. With Sama moving to Paris, we have a new chairman as well. Dr. Ali Hagar with Virginia Tech is now the chair for VNEC. So a couple changes there. Also, as we briefed you last time, Marshall mentioned that we were working on a meeting with the governor's staff. We are hoping to have that sometime this month. And that the next meeting will update you guys on how that's going to go. But one of the topics of that meeting is talking about Virginia and how it can be a leader in innovation. So this conversation today has been great on that. And the Energy Workforce Cluster, we are still pushing the 17th Energy Workforce Cluster. As a reminder, that is, right now, if you want a job in energy, you have to go to agriculture, manufacturing. Energy doesn't have its own cluster. So this is starting at the high school level where kids can see working as a line worker or a welder, what paths that they can take for jobs. So we're trying to get that in place. And I know Eric has sent a link to the website. I'll ask him to send it out again. We need people to sign up. We want to show the governor that there is support in industry. Not only do we have nuclear support, but we are working with the gas guys as well on support of this. So, and some other groups too. We've had a lot of good support. We were at the Virginia Chamber Energy event 3 weeks ago, and we had a lot of support there, people signing up to get this cluster in place. Next thing, right now, we are looking at our strategic plan and updating it. We will probably be going over that with you at the next meeting and focusing on their strategic plan and membership. I think that's pretty much everything we have so far.
Any questions for April? Okay.